Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining Herring, Hawk, Horse. Wow, say that 5 times fast. Practicum mentor orientation. We're so glad to have you all here. Great to see some returning faces. Great to see some new faces. Actually, I don't think there are any new faces on quite yet, but there will be. Um, and we'll go ahead and get rolling. Feel free to holler out any questions or pop them in the chat. We're going to kind of go over the general structure of Practicum, as well as hit some highlights that will be helpful for you as mentors. So, starting with the Practicum structure, so we had the React class graduates, the Node Express class graduates, and we advised them all to make themselves into little groups of about 3 React students, 2 Node students to a group roughly, which gets interesting because sometimes you have some folks that are dual enrolled in both. But regardless, all of the teams are about 5 to 6 students quantity-wise, and they will all have at least one of you all as a mentor for a number of groups. Then we also have paired mentors too. So that way, if one of you is out or sick or anything like that, then you have somebody as a backup, and or maybe you only specialize in React or only specialize in Node, so you have a counterpart to be able to help the students in the area that maybe isn't a primary area for you. For the Ruby on Rails groups, we have 4 teams. This is the most teams we've had in like 2 years, 3 years, something like that. So it was pretty exciting to see how many students in Ruby on Rails graduated and wanted to move along to Practicum. So they have about 5 students to a team. Some are smaller, 3 to 5, depending on the group size. And each of them will have a dedicated mentor as well. And we will also have, backup assistants sort of here and there fluttering along in both React Node and Ruby on Rails Practicum, so that if you do need an extra pair of hands for a particular period of time, then there's somebody that you can lean on. I like to highlight the Practicum curriculum goals when we're going through orientation. So the main thing we want students getting out of this experience, besides, of course, building on everything that they learned in class, is also to kind of stretch out of their comfort zone a little. So it's okay to encourage them to use like bootstrapping, Tailwind, different gems that maybe weren't addressed in the Ruby on Rails class. Using other tools for wireframing, getting themselves comfortable with Trello boards, whether you use GitHub projects or something comparable. So just kind of getting them comfortable with the workflow is also part of where we expect them to go with Practicum, is get exposure to that, get comfortable with that. The biggest takeaway is to also help them get comfortable sort of cooperating, collaborating with one another, and communicating, because for a lot of students, it's nerve-wracking to have to talk about tech when your spoken language that you have to speak about tech in is not your primary language, and you're also having to talk about tech and kind of demonstrate your confidence in your knowledge through communicating. So getting an experience to be able to practice that in a safe space is really helpful too. So if you do have any quiet students in your group, it's helpful to encourage them to be like, hey, you're going to have to talk to project managers. You're going to have to talk to colleagues. You're going to have to interview for jobs. Now is a great time to start getting comfortable talking about these things. And of course, fostering that, it's okay to ask questions environment is really good. So as I had mentioned in here, using project management tools, getting just a big picture overview of concept to build to testing to deployment, and kind of that whole workflow process, as well as Agile Scrum stand-ups, where it's sort of this iterative, cyclical kind of process to be able to build something and continue to improve on it. Most students, for those of you who haven't volunteered as a mentor in the classes or as an assignment reviewer in the classes, most students, this will be their first foray into seeing merge conflicts and having to deal with them. When they're just doing one-on-one, just focused on their classwork and not touching code bases that other people are working with as well during class, then they shouldn't have any merge conflicts. Not that they don't. I know there have been a student here too that they forgot to merge and then they did another pull request, and then, things blow up on them and they get a mentor to help them through that process. But most of these students, merge conflicts are going to be a new field for them to be able to understand what they are, why they are, and what to do with them. Learning about code review, practicing in that, practicing demoing work that goes along with that communicating aspect that I talked about earlier. Complete and deploy a simple app, simple being the key word. A lot of them want to make the next big thing, but they only have 8 weeks to build it in. So that's where you all will be able to kind of help guide them of let's zero in and focus on the really critical MVPs, and the rest of the stuff is fluff that we can add in if there's time at the end. The final 2 weeks of practicum also have them prepping and applying for or interviewing for jobs, kind of a thing. So that's a new addition for any of you that are returning to us from a previous practicum. Okay, so what are we using tools-wise throughout this? So all of their content is going to be at the classes.codethedream.org site. You all also will have access to that information. It's 4 2-week sprints, and then the final 2 weeks is that career development piece where they'll talk about and think about behavioral and technical interviews. They'll take a look at their LinkedIn profiles. They'll take a look at their resumes and aspects of that nature in those final 2 weeks. For all of the teams, Code the Dream will set up a repository for each of their projects. For the React Node teams, there'll be a front repo and a back repo. For the Ruby on Rails, they'll have one primarily. So if your team decides to use like a React front end to their Ruby project, then let us know. So that way, if you need us to set up a secondary repository for your team, then we can get that in place for you. Slack is going to be the primary, method of communication. Students are already in their team channels for Slack, and if we have not already, then we will be adding you by the weekend into those channels as well too. It's got some pretty good tools as far as being able to have like GitHub pull request notifications pop up in your team's channel. If that's going to clutter your conversation too much, it's okay to let Frank or Reed or myself know, hey, set up a secondary GitHub channel for my team so that way they can have one channel that focuses on here's when PRs are merged or submitted, and then a separate channel for actual sort of structural communication. We don't have a standard in place as far as like Jira, Trello, anything of that nature. So it's up to you all and up to your teams as far as what tools and related to that you'd like to use. GitHub Projects is pretty easy, user-friendly, and it's right there already in GitHub, since they're already in there anyway doing their PRs. But whatever tools you might need or want, just let Frank or I know so that way we can get things squared away for you. Questions up to this point? Okay, cool. So roles and expectations, students should be completing any assigned tasks weekly. Who assigns those tasks? The team will decide who's working on what pieces. You all will be helping guide them. You'll probably kind of have an idea of where people's strengths and weaknesses lie as you get to know them a little bit better, and can sort of better cater to be able to have people stretching out of their comfort zones, or reinforcing somebody that's maybe taking on something that's new and extra for them. Have a partner in their end in your team to be able to kind of help them out. So sort of dual allocate something to individuals. But they should take care of anything that is their responsibility for taking care of, and keep tabs on all of those communications in Slack, in whatever kind of project management board you use. Communicating regularly is going to be key. If there is a student that goes silent on you, they're not showing up to meetings, they're not responding to Slack messages, they're not engaging with the team in the Slack channel, let Frank or I know right away. If they are not engaged and active in their group, then they will be pulled from the group. They will not be allowed to finish practicum, because it's not fair to have you and your team that is engaged wondering, did this thing we assigned them, is that going to get done? Are they working on it? Are they not working on it? What's happening? So communicating regularly is key. Let us know of any ghosts. We'll call out the Ghostbusters. Attending group weekly meetings is expected, so they should be in their weekly meetings. At minimum, you should have one whole team meeting every week. Usually they run about an hour. Sometimes they might go a little longer. Sometimes they might go a little shorter. They'll probably be a little longer in your first week or two, just because everybody's getting comfortable and set up. Teams can also opt to have just an end meeting too. So React students might get together to be able to confirm and plan what's going on with React end of the project. Node students, same thing. So those might be options that students in your team decide to go along with. Regardless, all of the values that we hold at Code the Dream as far as inclusion, community growth, and impact should also be present. So if there are any power struggles, headbutting, anything of that variety that happens in your team, please reach out to Reed, Frank, or I, so that way we can help intervene and or um, alleviate the situation, investigate and alleviate the situation. Um, we really want them kind of treating practicum as a dress rehearsal for whatever their first developer role is or whatever their next developer role is, in case some of them are in like Q&A or other jobs and are just working towards adjusting where in the tech industry they work. So they should treat it as such, you know, being on time for meetings, being professional in their communications, all of those things are expected. Letting team know if they're going to be absent for a period of time, that kind of a thing. In general, the workload should be about how it was in their class. So Reed, what was it, like 12 hours, I think, is the average that students usually spend each week on classwork. Yeah. So we usually give a window of 15 to 20 because some people might need a little more time, some people might take a little less time, but we'd rather them overshoot how much time to commit and be pleasantly surprised if it takes them less time to get things done. But so that sort of 10 to 20 hours window is what they should be looking at. If you have students that say, I'm spending 40 to 60 hours on this project, they're probably doing too much and they need to kind of scale it back a little, give themselves some breathing room, not take on quite so much, balance things a little bit better. And or they need to be doing smaller tasks and getting the support they need. So that's just a sort of rough timeline to kind of keep in mind there. For roles and expectations for you all is attending the group weekly meetings. You should help provide sort of the voice of experience or at least give a perspective for them as far as keeping things appropriately scaled for the amount of time that they're working, as well as just being a reference source. It doesn't mean you have to have all of their answers. It doesn't mean you have to be helping them solve all of their problems. It does mean that you should be able to help point them in the right direction so that way they can build the confidence and build the knowledge of what do I do when I have a problem? How do I solve this problem? We encourage you to set boundaries so that and encourage students to be able to work independently or cooperatively first. So it's definitely okay to say, how much of this have you tried to problem solve on your own? Here are some things that you should check whenever you're trying to problem solve and helping give advice that way and let them kind of work things out a little bit on their own at first. Um, Anything to add to that, Reed? I feel like I'm not really addressing that quite as efficiently as I could.
I think that's pretty good, but maybe anyone from who's mentored in Practicum before can jump in.
In relation to boundaries.
I think one of the things that was a little bit difficult to figure out in the last practicum that I was a part of was um, like what is the amount of responsibility, particularly like in code reviews. That was something that our team kind of had to figure out. Like towards the beginning, that is a little bit more on the mentor side of things, and so my teammate and I were trying to do that. But as we were shifting through the course of practicum, it was there were certain points where we had to sort of transition that responsibility to the students just because there was too much for just the two of us to handle. And so having some boundaries of, okay, this is the expectation of what we're going to do for you guys versus what you guys should try to do first and then come to us if you need help. And after that, it definitely got a little bit easier for our group.
Awesome. Thank you, Eli. Yeah, that's very helpful. And I'm glad too that you highlighted that things might feel a little different in the first week or two. And it's definitely a good decision to start transitioning them after that first sprint, especially to stand on their own a little bit more and be a little more confident in taking things on themselves, kind of motivate them to have that initiative. Awesome. And then, of course, supporting students and embodying those same values that we expect of students, inclusion, community growth, and impact, are also key things that we would expect you all to kind of embody and carry throughout the practicum experience. The example work week that we provide the students with during student orientation is like Monday through Friday, regular check-in project management, whether that's, keeping tabs on your project board and or having like an asynchronous daily update or every other day update saying, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm working on, this is what I'm stuck on, is always helpful to have sort of on a regular consistency throughout the week. On the meeting day, they should definitely be in attendance for the meeting, work together on any problems, catch up on what everybody has accomplished and where they need to go. If something's taking longer, readjust who's helping whom, or redetermining like, is that something that we need, or do we need to just focus on the really critical parts and getting those perfected before moving on? Weekends, it's kind of up to the students. They're used to a Wednesday to Tuesday schedule with class where they're probably spending their weekends doing a lot of work, and that's perfectly fine, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that needs to be the expectation for you all as far as, engaging with them on weekends. So again, it kind of comes back to boundaries. Make sure that you're clear with them as far as like, if you message me at 5 o'clock on a Friday, I'm not going to respond until Monday, or whatever's comfortable for your schedule and sort of what your personal expectations and values are as far as how much time and when that time is that you're going to contribute. We do have a couple of holiday weeks that are going to happen during this practicum. So on the classes side of things, the week of Thanksgiving, nothing really happens that week. Mentors don't have to show up for sessions, students don't have new lessons, that kind of a thing. For practicum, since they're a little bit more of a Monday to Friday kind of deal, then it is a little bit of a change. But there are 2 weeks that we're expecting. Don't worry about anything unless you yourself haven't finished the task that you were assigned for that week and you'd like to chip away at it, but know that you might not have the support those weeks because they are holiday weeks. So the week of Thanksgiving and then the final week of the year, between the Christmas holiday and New Year's, are time frames when it's okay to step back and, before you go, let them know, hey, I'm going to be gone for the week for the holiday or whatever. So those little reminders are helpful. Questions about class flow or anything along those lines? Cool. Okay. So some things to highlight. First 2 weeks are the most important. During that first meeting, demonstrating how a pull request and how merge conflicts work is really helpful to get them comfortable with it early on. There is an excellent sort of teaching protocol that Reed has encouraged mentors and classes to use, and that he's encouraged staff members to use as well too, where it's I do, we do, you do. So demonstrate what it is that you're doing and then start involving them in the process of what you're doing, and then they should have ownership to be able to do that item on their own. So definitely feel free to mimic that as you're demonstrating these things as well too. You can do that by either like creating a sample demo repository and kind of walk through the steps. In a previous orientation, then I had set up something similar, and it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be a single repo with a single JavaScript file, your name, somebody changes it to their name, merge conflict happens because on the very same first line of code in the one line of code in the one JavaScript file, it's a different name now. So it doesn't have to be anything grotesquely complex, but just being able to demonstrate to them like, this is what this screen is showing you to compare the one version to the other. Which one do you want to keep? Is really helpful visuals for them when this is a new topic for them. Some students can be weak with Git commands and GitHub still, even though we've had them utilizing a branch off of main to build your feature, to build your work, and then pull request back to your main throughout the course. But some students struggle with it throughout. Some reviewers don't kind of catch and help throughout the class to be able to get them back on track. And some students just, it's a big concept that they've struggled with even from intro. So any kind of support that you can give in that area is helpful, and getting them to where they are feeling more comfortable with that workflow process, and making sure that they're updating main before they branch off and all of that good stuff is really going to be helpful to kind of reduce problems for you and for them as you go along. At the end of the first 2 weeks, the entire team should have agreed on an application and the features, the MVP, and have started working on a basic design of screens. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy, like this doesn't need to be some XD Illustrator prototype or anything like that. Like it can be somebody drew it on a notepad. They could use Figma, they could use Canva, they can use whatever they want to be able to kind of wireframe or conceptualize what is this going to be built of? How is it going to move between different views and that kind of a thing. And then lastly, a reminder about the extra weeks, that we do have those extra weeks built in for Thanksgiving and Christmas, but the time will go by fast, and there shouldn't be an expectation of anybody, yourselves included, to have to work through those 2 holiday weeks. Questions about any of those highlights?
I had a quick question about
Yeah.
stuff like the setting up the repo and stuff like that. And I guess I'm wondering about the boundary thing. This is my first time doing this. Um, as far as like some of the admin settings on the repo and some of the things we could do to kind of protect them against, violating best practices, is that okay for us to do if there's really simple things we can set, or is it more of we should be explaining to them what they should be doing and why they should be doing it, as far as like just like a very basic like branch protection on main, that kind of a thing?
I think it's good to explain it to them. I don't know that they necessarily have to see how that's built out, but if you're on a call with them while you're describing and you want to kind of show them this is how this is set up, this is how this is built out, or talk to them even about like user levels on repositories, those are things that they probably haven't had much exposure to in classes since they've been working on their own code bases. So I think that's a helpful thing to do. All of you will have admin access on your repositories. So that way, if there are changes that you need to make, you can. If you run into any issues, or if you would feel more comfortable an owner from Code the Dream making those changes, that's totally fine. Let Frank or I know, and we can set those branch protections up or make those adjustments. Awesome. Thanks, Rob. Did that answer your question, or was there anything else or follow-up questions you had at all?
Yeah. I think you're kind of saying like we can do it, they can do it, you guys can do it. We, as long as it's just the minor stuff like that, but
Exactly.
we let them know why.
Yes. Yeah. Perfect. Awesome. Thanks. Alrighty, moving right along. So at the end of Practicum, around January 21st, 22nd, somewhere in there is when we'll have a demo day. In previous Practicums, we've had students present at Weekly Cafe, which is noon on Tuesdays. It's a staff meeting for Code the Dream. So they're presenting to other apprentices who are Practicum graduates, as well as staff members, project managers, that kind of a thing. But we have so many teams, and that meeting's typically only an hour long, and we can't fit 13 teams meetings in an hour-long session. They'd have like 2 minutes to present, which is really hard to do for something that you've worked so hard on for 8 to 10 weeks. So for that reason, we have moved it to being a different time. Last cohort of Practicum, we had it on a Friday evening. And it was mostly just the students and the mentors that wound up showing up. So we're debating having it on a different night of the week, and also accompanying that with encouragement of current apprentices and staff members at CTD to be able to attend. So we haven't finalized the day and time of when those demos will happen, but teams will have about 5 to 10 minutes to be able to present their project overall. We give them a standard slide deck, but they can build something themselves too if they want to, highlighting like what are the tools that they used as far as, did they incorporate particular gems, MUI, any kind of open source APIs for their data, anything like that. As well as who worked on what aspects. They give a demo of their product, so that way they can explain, how is authentication working? How is login working? How do the bits of data interact and work with one another? How does the user interact with all of that? So it'll be a nice, fun demo night that'll be celebratory and exciting. But the work part of it all, so yes, of course, they get stressed about having to demo their work and all of that. But the work part of it all is doing some evaluations. So you all will evaluate the students that are in your team only. If you are just a React mentor or just a Node mentor, you can review just your React students or just your Node students. You don't have to evaluate everybody in your team. But we do like to know feedback from you, because we pass that along to them as far as here's what your mentors and your teammates were suggesting are areas that you might want to strengthen. Here are areas that you really shine at. So that way they have that in their little toolbox of, what can I highlight as I'm interviewing for jobs, and what do I need to be working on while I'm interviewing for jobs. In those evaluations, it'll be basically like a checklist of demonstrated, did not demonstrate kind of levels of different skill sets as far as, comfort level with Git workflow, initiative for tackling new projects, and just various aspects like that. So you'll just go through that form for each of those individuals and turn those in, as well as any other feedback that you want to share. So there are spots where you can say they did great at this, this, and this. This area was an area of concern. We also ask for you to share if you think that they would be potential candidates for the apprenticeship, assuming that they apply for that. Not every student can apply for it. It's only open for people with work authorization with the US. And not every student does apply for it, because if they are already in the tech industry and they're just trying to make lateral moves or slanted moves, lateral and up, then they might not be interested in the apprenticeship, and they're just trying to kind of further their career that they've already kind of started out with. So yes, any advice about what you've observed is very welcome, and it helps us when we get to the point of evaluating who might be a good fit for an apprenticeship in our development shop versus who might need to strengthen skills, or who might be kind of overqualified for our apprenticeship as well too. So that hits the highlights. Frank and I will be sending out reminders generally the 8th week of practicum is when we'll send out reminders, and then ideally have your evaluations in by the end of the 9th week. So that way we can have that information ready to rock and roll. As I had mentioned, for the repositories, each team has 2 for the front end and the back end. For the React Node, Ruby on Rails, we'll have an individual one. Previously, we allowed students to build off of a Ruby on Rails student's final project to be able to have that as sort of the starting point. But this time around, we're encouraging them to start a whole new project of their own device. So we'll likely be leaning more that direction, just because there was always confusion with whoever's repository it was, and having to add collaborators to to a personal account, rather than being able to add collaborators to a Code the Dream account, that kind of a thing. You all will be overseeing the repositories. As I had mentioned, you'll have administrative access on those repositories, but students should be observing like those merge conflict resolutions. They should be understanding the process that's happening with that code base, as far as having a main branch, having a testing branch, having a development branch, however you decide to have them structure it. That's something that they should be aware of, and the reason for why that is. One big difference that you'll need to help them remember, especially in those first 2 weeks, is cloning the repository instead of forking. So for the Node class and the Ruby on Rails class especially, they have repositories they work with in class that are starter code. And so for those, they fork a copy themselves, so that way they're not messing up our standard blank slate starter information. And then they clone their fork, and they're just working within their own forked copy of the repository in class. But in this instance, they should just go ahead and clone directly. If they make their own copy, they're going to be really confused why pushing their stuff didn't make any changes in the project that everybody's working on. So making sure that they clone and not fork is going to be really key, and encouraging and enforcing that they need to be doing their work on separate branches as well too. Okay, I mentioned at the beginning about the career prep weeks. So these are fairly new. Our last cohort was the first practicum cohort to have the career prep weeks. Lillian Wong is our learning engineer and focuses on student success. And she will be likely leading the overall all practicum meetings that happen those weeks. But you all should also still have your weekly team meeting where you're touching on these topics. Everything's outlined in the class curriculum as far as an activity for them to do. So it's looking at different job descriptions and kind of determining, am I a good fit for this? Am I not a good fit for this? Kind of a thing to get them comfortable with how to filter through all of the information that is shared on job descriptions. As well as doing like some resume work and things of that nature. So they should attend their team meeting on weeks 9 and 10, even though all of their coding is done and behind them and their demo is completed. But they also should be attending one large group meeting with Lillian and all of the other students and all of the other teams to be able to talk about those topics from weeks 9 and 10. Yeah. The students might ask during those 2 weeks for advice or review of their resume. It's optional if you want to. If you don't have the bandwidth or you feel that you aren't the best person to be doing those tasks, because not everybody is honed towards career development tasks, that's totally fine. Just let Frank or I know, so that way if the student is needing some kind of support or review, then we can get that from other sources within Code the Dream to be able to take a look at those things for them. Questions about the career prep information? Okay, cool. Moving right along. Okay, we're at the end of our slides here. The important takeaways that we'd like you all to kind of carry with you is to schedule office hours. That's part of setting those healthy boundaries. It's definitely important for students to know those boundaries because they will have them in their jobs as well too. And it's also healthy for you all, so that way you aren't overtaxed by any support that is needed of you. As a parent, I can appreciate sometimes people just ask more than you can give. Anyhow, it is okay to tell them, I'm not available to help with this. Give them an alternative. So if there is something that you have to say, I can't do this for you right now, or for your sake, I need to not be doing this for you, then giving them some kind of alternative is key. So letting them know to either reach out to an assistant mentor if you have an assistant mentor on your team, reach out to another teammate that you know within the team might be stronger at that particular skill set and can kind of help guide their teammate along to be able to pair program, or even just like check out resources. It's totally okay to direct them to tutorials that you've used, video content that explains ideas and concepts to be able to help them through any areas that they might be struggling with, developmental documentation, so that way they can dig into that, get comfortable digging into that, and get a better handle on things is totally fine. Teams that have sorry, somebody was about to ask a question, I think.
Yeah, along those lines, since it's 2024 and it's software development, I have to ask about AI.
Yes,
And
thank you.
is that forbidden? Is that encouraged? What is the policy on that?
It's encouraged if it's used in the right way. You all probably feel pretty good about what is the right way to use AI. So they shouldn't be having AI writing the code that they are tasked to write for their teams. But it is an extremely helpful tool. At the beginning, you may need and or want to guide them as far as like efficient prompt writing for AI. So that way they aren't saying, give me this, and then they get that without understanding what is this and why did I get this. So AI is fine for them to use in the context of learning. So it's totally great for them to go to ChatGPT and be like, explain hooks to me like I'm a 5-year-old. Or something along those lines is totally fine. It's also a really great translation tool too, from what I have seen so far. So that can be helpful too for them to be able to be like, explain such and such to me in this language, this dialect. So that can be helpful resource as well. Does that help answer your question, Rob? Do you feel like there's still gray area on any of that?
No, that's perfect.
Perfect. And then the last takeaway, teams that have a strong front or back or have strong individuals, encourage those students to take on a little bit more and stretch themselves further. If they feel like they might want to go into the realm of like a PM, PO role or some other kind of leadership within the industry, then it's also okay to encourage them, assuming that they don't have really strong personalities that might railroad other teammates. Encourage them to kind of foster and support somebody who does need to bring their skills up to a higher level. I've seen both of those things play out in practicum groups. I've seen strong students foster and support a weaker student within a group, and it's made for a really cool bond and for really excellent growth and helping build confidence in both of them. And I've also seen it the other way, where it's like your advice actually wasn't welcome, and it's okay for you to have gone off and done your own thing and stretched your own skills and not tried to support somebody that is okay struggling and figuring it out on their own, and that's more what they needed in that particular context. So yeah, giving support to either raise teammates up or encouraging sort of that self-development is also good. That hits the highlights of everything that we wanted to cover tonight. So I'd really like to stop yammering at you all and open it up. Feel free to share any kind of questions, worries, concerns, anything that pops into your head, we are here for.
Are there any prior examples of what teams have done, just to understand like the scope of what other teams have done?
Yeah, I can definitely I'll grab a couple of the projects from our last practicum cohort as well as the video of the demos for you, Rob, and I'll pop that up in the Practicum Mentors channel so that way you all can take a look if you need or want to take a look at it for reference. If you feel like you need or want to see any of the students' final projects, to know sort of what was the final project they turned in at the end of the class that got them into practicum, then just let me know who you're inquiring about so that way I can get that information to you as well too.
And along the same lines is also where does the project end up deployed? Is there any standard place?
Usually render, I think, tends to be the most common. Frank actually would probably have better information on that than I am, since I am less technical in nature and more administrative in nature within the organization. So I will ask Frank to let you know if that varies from my understanding.
Do you use the Learns app for Practicum?
Yes, yeah, the Learns app will be used for those of you that are new to us. So we have an LMS that has been built by individuals, and it's absolutely wonderful. And the students use it for their week-to-week lessons. The sprints are also structured as weekly lessons within the Learns app. So that way, actually, here, let me give you a visual on it because that will be a lot more meaningful than me yammering about what it looks like and how it works. So for a student, they would be in the Learns app like so. The course would be Horse Hawk Practicum, for example. Jumping into the class, we have a Welcome to Practicum item that they can look through between now and November 11th. Students should already have access to this information, so they can take a look at the information as far as like, this is how we're structured, this is what you'll learn, that kind of a thing. And then from there, the sprints are broken up into week 1 of 2, week 2 of 2. In each of those weeks, then it'll highlight as far as for React Node groups, this is what backend should be doing this week. This is what front end should be focusing on this week. For the lesson materials, it kind of helps outline things that need to be talking points in their team meetings and or items that should be decided on, or sort of checkpoints of if your project has such and such, you should be at this phase by this point in the sprint. There are some additional resources. So as I had mentioned about if you're not able to help a student with something, be sure that you're giving them an alternative and pointing them in the right direction. You can even point back to these lesson pages as well too, as far as like understanding differences between Git and GitHub, working with a code base that you didn't build, and so it doesn't look normal to you for the way your mind processes how you would have built the code. All kinds of different various resources are available through there, including things on concepts about like agile principles, using scrums and sprints, using Kanban boards. So there's additional content in each of those pages. For the very end, oh, actually, I'm wondering if I think I need to double check that. The career dev weeks aren't showing up right here, so I might have to see what's going on with that. Yeah, I think I have a boo-boo on the back end that I need to fix for the Horse Hawk group. Let me see if it showed up in the Herring Practicum or if it's cut out of there. No, okay, here we go. Good. So there's career mindset. That's going to be, understanding what do I want in the industry? What kind of jobs do I want to be looking for? Where do my strengths lie? Networking, the pluses and minuses of recruiters, putting things together in a resume. So lots of content and information that is available there as well. Is that helpful?
Is it only student will work with
No,
the
you all should have access to it too, Vadim. Thanks for letting me know.
okay.
Yeah, you all should be able to log in as a mentor and be able to take a look at the courses as well. I don't have it in under my account as a mentor. I just have it in under as a student, but it would be the same kind of content as far as being able to access the class calendar and those sprint pages.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Sunny.
Um, I'm sorry to come out as like and ask this a primitive question. This is basically the first time I'll be doing this. When I filled up the form and we discussed with Reed, I believe we were talking about like because in the form it was mentioned that whoever is not mentored before would primarily be just doing code reviews or assignments and those kind of things rather than doing a group mentoring. Like I'm just assuming this is a common session and like you're giving away the common information for everyone, or is it so will there be someone else will be the group mentor and I'll be doing the assistant role or
Yeah.
something like that? Or
Yeah, it
Uh,
can definitely vary from team to team. It kind of is dependent on the volunteer support system that we wind up getting in place. You are paired with somebody that has done it before. So you will be with an experienced mentor to be able to work through and kind of get a feel for how all of that looks. And you
right,
and
yeah.
other mentors for your team should communicate as far as sort of expectations, because even within the mentors, so of course students, some students might be stronger at some skills than others. Even within the mentors, there might be things that you were wanting to get out of your volunteer experience. So talking with your mentors, as far as like, this is what I feel comfortable doing as far as my own skill level, or, I came into volunteer because I really enjoy this aspect and I'd like to do as much of that as possible. So definitely talk with your co-mentors about that.
And I could also jump in here, Sunny. I think when I share that information in the volunteer interest meetings, it usually means that a volunteer in the classes, not the practicum, is going to be doing one-on-ones and assignment review. So if
yeah,
that's actually what you're planning on doing, let me know and we could put you in a class rather than the practicum.
right, yeah. I assume that this would be like in a class rather than a practicum, but because that's what I initially thought, like in our meeting and everything. Even when I was filling up the form, I thought it was like for the class where I'll be doing like assignment reviews or code reviews or something like that, or just giving feedback to the students for
Okay,
that.
okay, let's do that instead. If you want to, I'll reach out to you on Slack and we can talk about whether the React or Node class is better. But that sounds like the better option, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Any other last minute questions out there? Okay. Um, Oh, Amir was asking about reviewing PRs. For the role that you're playing in it, yes, Amir, you probably will be working on PR review. So anybody that's on the call that's a current apprentice, that will be assisting mentors with teams, then doing code review, reviewing PRs will likely be a sizable chunk of the work that you'll be doing. But again, it also might ebb and flow. Talk to your mentors too, as far as if there are other aspects of mentoring the team that you'd like to take on. Since the primary mentors or the co-primary mentors on the teams have admin level, then they will likely be the ones doing the merge for PRs after they've been approved. All right. Okay, well, I've got to jump because our student orientation for practicum is starting. So I need to hop on over to that call. If you have questions that come up, feel free to reach out to Frank, Reed, or I. Thank you all so much for attending tonight. We are here if you need anything or have any questions. All right, thanks everybody. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks.